Welcome to the July 14th, 2021 meeting of the Safety and Wellness Task Force. We call this meeting to order at 6:00 p.m. This task force has been jointly appointed by Durham's Board of County Commissioners, Durham Public Schools Board of Education, and Durham City Council. We are a community-led task force charged with examining the public safety and wellness needs of Durham residents and communities, with educating residents on existing public safety and wellness resources, and to provide recommendations for additional programming to ensure and enhance public safety and wellness that rely on community-based prevention, intervention, and reentry services as alternatives to policing and the criminal legal system. You'll hear more about this mission later in the agenda. Since we last met, we have divided into committees that we're calling roundtables. These roundtables have been meeting in the interim and are focusing on 4 specific areas: the criminal legal system, school resource officers, the 911 call system, and violence interruption. We will hear preliminary progress reports from these roundtables this evening. Prior to these reports, our Fuse Fellow, Dr. Dwayne Campbell, will review the roundtable guidelines now that they've actually had a chance to start meeting, and they may have questions about their charge. We are also supported by Ryan Smith, who is our newly appointed director of Durham's brand new Safety and Wellness Department. We congratulate Ryan on this appointment, and we look forward to hearing from him also just prior to Dr. Campbell's presentation. I'd also like to acknowledge the ongoing support of Dr. Anjane Clemens, who has offered so much insight on community safety, and she has recently just been awarded her PhD in public policy from Duke University Sanford School of Public Policy. We congratulate you, Dr. Clemens.
Thank you.
James Spears is also with us. He'll be taking notes for us. We thank him for his presence here and at our roundtables. And our own task force member, Manju Rajendran, will be monitoring our chat. Task force members, as much as possible, we ask you to actually unmute and ask your questions with your voice to our presenters, as opposed to placing questions in the chat. We know also that there are moments where you just got to get it written down. And if that's the case, Manju will be available to acknowledge any important chat questions before we move on to the next agenda item. So thank you for your patience during this long opening, but it's been a while since we met. I kind of want to go back over while we're here and who's supporting us. Marcia Owen is going to review our values, but before she does, please join us in a moment of silence centered on the safety and wellness of our residents and community. Thank you. Marcia.
Good evening. It's so good to see everyone. And Dr. Ajanu Clemens, I just have to say how pleased and proud I am. That's just fantastic. And I look forward to hearing you sharing your dissertation, the lessons that you have learned being in Durham with us in another meeting. Every meeting we begin with our values. And as we begin in our roundtables, interviewing folks and listening to people and reaching out deeper into the community, one of the values that just keeps coming up for me is respect. And so I was reflecting on in our wall of values that we all created together, what are the values that respect requires? And what came up for me on the wall was dignity, solidarity, gratitude, graciousness, listening, belonging, and one value that is not on our wall that just to me is what I feel when I'm respected is trust. So this evening, do we all agree that we could add trust to our values? Thumbs up if that's good. Beautiful. Thank you. So good to be together. And now, as we begin our meeting, I would like to introduce once again, used to be the head of innovation team, and now the director of our new Department of Community Safety. I want to thank you for Ryan Smith, for your presentation at our last meeting. And I also just have to do a shout out for what you've also done already in the criminal legal system with Judge Maris, Judge Carr Davis, and DA DeBerry on the DEAR program, the expungement and relief in resolution work that you did for tens of thousands of Durham residents. So thank you for the work you've already done. And look, and we welcome you this evening to hear more about now that we have finally and formally a new Department of Community Safety in the great city of Durham. Ryan?
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Xavier. And thanks to everyone else. It's good to be back with you again tonight. I'm going to provide a brief update and then just open it up for questions, because a lot of things that I presented the last time are still just very relevant and exactly where we're at. The first thing that I want in this new role to say again is to state how excited that I am that we have a Community Safety and Wellness Task Force, how genuinely appreciative I am of your service and how much we need it. And, you know, the Community Safety Department is very committed to supporting you. And I really want to put the emphasis on support. As you know, we have staff in the department. So Dr. Dwayne Campbell is in the department and a full-time intern, James, and we will have other staff, but we will have staff dedicated to supporting. And when I say support, I mean that you are leading this effort, that we need your leadership in identifying other investments that the city or other governments might make, other things that we can do together. And our job is we come with no agenda for this group other than to do anything we can to support your work. And so if that is, again, helping with research, I'll talk about some of the resources that I think are available to support this work in just a moment. But I just want to reiterate that I'm very, as I intend to lead in a very collaborative way, very open and transparent. I really want to find opportunities to work with you. But even more than that, I want to be, part of my service and the service of the department is to serve this group and to do whatever we can to help you succeed in the important charge that you've been given. And I just, I intend to hopefully and demonstrate that to you all, across our time together. And I'm really also just want to thank Dwayne. Dwayne is the full-time staff lead providing this work. And I appreciate his thoughtfulness and care that he is bringing to it. And I want you to know that as there are additional things that you need, if there are needs and things that can support this work that you don't currently have, I want you to reach out to Dwayne and myself, and that we will do what we can to figure out how to resource that. And on that topic, I want to talk about a few things that we have been working on. One is I'm working to hopefully finalize a contract for language justice services so that this task force will be able to provide a translation, interpretation. Also, just to work, the plan is to contract with Tilde Language Justice Co-op, which we have worked with in the past in the city. They do great work. They have a history of working with other task force. And they are really excellent. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness they bring to language justice. And I know that they will be great partners in as much as this task force, and I'm sure that you all will need that type of support. I'm hoping that we will have that capacity available and resource available to you in August. We're working on finalizing those details now, but I just wanted to share that as soon as it is available. I'm sure it'll be something we can talk about at the next meeting and how you can make use of those services, but it will be available to you for your roundtables, for town halls, for other things that you might need. Another thing is I know that Dwayne has been reporting to me from your roundtable discussions of ideas and ways that you want to be supportive of residents who are engaged in your roundtables and in town halls. And I think that we have funding to support that. I'm very supportive of that. What I've asked Dwayne to do is to provide some type of, not a detail, but some concrete sense of what it is, how many individuals we might want to provide, stipends or incentives or compensation for. and some proposal from you all that can help move that work forward. But I think that's absolutely something we can do and something that the city has done at different times in the past. Another thing that I want to share is that the city has set aside, my understanding, and I'll provide a final confirmation, but approximately $1 million to support this work, to support your work on this task force. And that money sits within the Community Safety Department, but it is money that is reserved to support this work and to advance ideas that you bring forward. One thing that I want to also just kind of set expectations around is having $1 million to support work that is related to the city. So I'm just thinking about what that process will look like. And on a previous task force that I've served on, I imagine that this group will move forward proposals at certain times, and that those proposals will have budgets attached to them. And so we'll just imagine that you all have a proposal that you bring forward for something that you think can advance safety and wellness, that proposal is appropriate for the city. So, if it's something for public schools or the county, we will need to talk with those government agencies about what their process is. But if it's something that is appropriate for the city and staff can support in that, then I would expect to receive a proposal from you all. And then that proposal would go before a work session of the city council, where I would expect task force members to be available to talk about the proposal, but there would be funding set aside pending support from the city manager and elected leaders, which is just true of any public dollars, that those go before an elected body. But the good news is that there is already at least a placeholder that can support some of the early work and proposals that you move forward. And the staff in this department will help move those things through the process as you, in your work in the community and in your due diligence, identify really promising things that are, again, appropriate for the city, that there are those funds that are going to be available to help support them. And we will work on creating maybe a process to help support you all in that. And as we've done for similar task force, and we'll be, I think it's probably too early. I wouldn't expect that you would all have proposals yet, but we also are not looking for you all to wait till the very end for proposals, and are hoping that things will, as you surface really promising ideas and initiatives, that you will bring them forward when they are ready at the appropriate time. Those are the things that I really wanted to stress. In terms of priorities for the department, they remain as I discussed at the last meeting, that we have three broad priorities. One is in piloting alternative responses to a subset of 911 calls, where we would dispatch unarmed, trained civilians to respond to a subset of calls that might involve calls relating behavioral or mental health needs, calls involving calls for general assistance, calls related to quality of life concerns, that these things would be places we would start. It will take some months of planning. And again, this is work that I'm hoping that we can collaborate with the roundtable on. But that is work that we're committed to putting into action, at least in an initial small pilot this year, that we can build on. So that's one area of priority. And I know that I'm fully open and ready to begin working with the roundtable. I'm waiting for you all to say we want to engage, but we're ready to do that. The second priority, which I've already talked about, is a full commitment to you and your important work. And that looks like having staff dedicated to support you as you need it. And then any other thing, helping you collect data. We've already gotten a request, for example, I know, for the data that was part of the 911 analysis, and we're working on getting that together, and we'll be providing that to all of you. And if there is data that you would like from other government agencies, our staff are happy to help in that if it's something that you need help with. And then, the other area is that the department has a number of contracts that we are responsible for managing the contract process, for working with those partners to understand how that work is going, to be thinking about what recommendations to make back to elected leaders for additional investments. These include things like the Bull City United Violence Interrupter Program that Durham County leads. It includes the Durham Expunction and Restoration Program that Legal Aid of North Carolina leads in collaboration with others. And I'm happy to provide an update on other contracts. I'm still getting up to speed on some of the contracts. We also have, for example, a couple of contracts with the DA's office. So that is our other kind of hat of responsibilities this year. And I'm hoping that this group will give us additional work to do, that you will identify really promising things that we can work together on. And I'm excited for your work. And I'll pause there for, for any questions you might have or comments.
Ryan, have you started reaching out to relevant stakeholders in the community, like the fire, Durham Police Department, Sheriff's Office, et cetera, Criminal Justice Resource Center? How are you going to start working with them on figuring out this alternative response system?
Yeah, so we're beginning to form.
Who you want to talk to, when, how you want to talk to them, that sort of thing.
Sure. We're beginning to form planning teams for all of these that include, it includes, behavioral and mental health and like experts. It includes folks at Alliance Health. It includes county agencies. It includes other first responders with experience. One of the things that I'm really committed to do, and this is one of the areas that I'm hoping and that we can begin working with the task force on, is how we can engage more with community members to understand their experiences of interacting with first responders, so that we
in the car.
So that we can be working as we are thinking about and designing these pilots. I really want to be working closely with our community on that as well. And I think and hoping that's a big area of collaboration with the task force. But all of the folks that you mentioned, Mike, are folks that we are working with and in conversation with, because they, and folks in the 911 call center, they're obviously going to be really important stakeholders in this, because we will likely be utilizing that capacity initially, which is consistent with other models we see across the country, that calls would come in there and then be dispatched out through that system to an alternative team of responders. But yes to all that.
So you've already started that process of reaching out to them about when and how to meet.
Yes, sir, we have.
Got it.
Yep.
We have questions from Andrea, Muffin, and then Jennifer.
Okay.
Yes. So I have a co-conspirator that works at Durham Tech, which is Miss Rashada. And so I was wondering, with the programs that they have for folks who be able to get certifications, the older folks, the older adults, let me put it that way, who have been justice involved. Is there a plan to get those folks trained up to be able to get those certifications and to be part of the alternative to calling 911?
Muffin, I really love that idea, and I would be happy for that to be something that we could talk about. We will have time. I mean, we're not going to be posting the responder positions right away, because we have still planning to do. So I do think, and I also think that pool of employment opportunities is going to be growing, that we'll have more positions like that. So I would certainly, one of the things I'm really committed to is I really want to, as much as we possibly can, to be hiring individuals from the community, hiring exactly, the individuals that you have named. So I really appreciate you lifting that up. And if there's an opportunity for, to begin talking about that now as part of the planning, I would really welcome that. So thank you.
Oh, yes. We can set up a meeting with me, you and Mr. Schroeder.
Okay. That sounds good,
Thank
Muffin.
you for answering my question.
Thank you.
Jennifer, and then Wanda.
Thank you. I wanted to ask briefly, you mentioned that you were gathering some 911 call data, and this is something I'm on the 911 roundtable that we were hoping to ask for. So I wanted to clarify what you were already doing, please.
I'm doing what I understand is your request, Jennifer. That's exactly what I was referencing, which is giving, at least what I heard from Dwayne was a request for the raw data. So the data. So that's what we're working on getting to to you and to that roundtable. And if there are additional clarifications you have, again, I'm a big believer in open data and transparency around data. So long as there are no other types of privacy concerns, and if there are ever any concerns for something that we think we can't give you, I will communicate that to you. We could have a conversation about it. If something we can resolve, we can. I want to get all the data that we can out to you all, but I think that should be ready soon.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to question your responsiveness. I think I'm not used to systems working this quickly. And as long as we have Dwayne on board, I need to get over that instinct. So thank you.
Me
quick
too.
Follow-up question.
I'm on board. So.
Quick follow-up question. We were also hoping to get a hold of call data or dispatch data specifically for the sheriff's department. And this brought up a question for me about our capacity to obviously there's cooperation among all parties here, but my understanding is that this department is part of the city. The sheriff does not work for the city. The sheriff works for the county. So do we anticipate any challenges? Will we be able to access that data, I guess is my question.
I'm just, so my initial answer to you is that I'm going to be very optimistic that we will be able to access that data. And if you were Dwayne, if you just send that specific request to me, I'm also happy to reach out to Sheriff Burkhead with this request and figure out, it should be a data that we should be able to get for the task force. And I will work on that, and certainly been able to get data related to some of those things in the past, but I don't know how long that will take given that it's not within the city, but I'm certainly happy to work in addition to other things that the task force will do to see if we can get that data. That's
helpful for me, and I appreciate your candor. Thank you.
Sure.
Could I also be CC'd on that public records request so I can monitor it as it's ushered through? I don't foresee it being a problem because at the end of the day, the sheriff's office, like public health, like the hospital, like is a public entity. So it doesn't matter that it's not the city, it's a public records request. So if you could CC me on that as well, and I'll also monitor and make sure that it's ushered in through the sheriff's office. Thank you.
So, so first I want to thank you for your openness. I am not accustomed to this kind of openness and cross collaboration. So it's really refreshing, and I'm hopeful that it will continue. One of the things that I would like to suggest is that has to do with untapped resources that are within our city in community spaces that may not be known by the city, the county, the Board of Education. So how can the city determine or gather that information? I mean, we will, so that's one way, but then the expectation would be that folks that are in districts 1 and 4, 2, 3, 5 are actually participatory and embedded in what we're doing, because they're community, we're community, and then also community health workers are another resource. So as you're looking at staffing up and thinking about ways to get the community involved, I just wanted to lift up those two collective impact type organizations that are doing this work.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and happy to follow up more with you on that, but those are great ideas. Thank you.
Any other hands?
Thanks, Ryan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And we look forward to giving you lots of ideas, lots of ways to spend that money to protect, to keep this community safe and well. Thank you so much.
It's not going anywhere till you give me ideas. So
okay, I love it. I love it. The pressure's on. Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
And now I'll pass it to Xavier.
And before we go to the next agenda item, Manju, is there anything else we need to in the chat that we might need to raise? No? Okay, good. All right, so then we move on. As you see, this is really a roundtable centered meeting. You've been in the work you've got questions. We want to see you move as efficiently as you can. And so we're going to review some of the guidelines that we talked about earlier, and Dwayne's going to handle that for us.
Hello, everyone. Just before we begin, I want to point out that James and I will be presenting today, and the presentation is also supported in the background by Dr. Clemens. I ask that we view this presentation as just additional guidelines for the roundtable. We're trying to make sure that the roundtables have as much resource to them as possible, so that at the end of everything that we have all the recommendations that we want that are most efficient for Durham and creating the safest community for all of Durham's population, especially those who are most vulnerable. To begin today's presentation, we will start with James.
Real quick, I'm going to get can you all see my shared screen here? And is
Yes.
it not in a
Yes.
weird presenter mode, or is it?
We're seeing it properly.
You're good.
All right, perfect. So yeah, as Dwayne kind of pointed out, we're just here to kind of give some clarification and guidance, specifically around the roundtable discussions, the listening sessions, and just provide more clarity. In large groups, communication when there's separate groups underneath that can be hard to come by. And we've recognized some patterns that we think might be helpful to address in this presentation. Let me see if I can actually change a slide. So I'm going to go over the basic mission, function, and duties of the Safety and Wellness Task Force in the first section. Then we're going to talk about the roundtables and listening sessions in the second portion, and then Dwayne will cover the approach to the work that y'all are doing and how to evaluate those through various methods. So beginning with the Safety and Wellness Task Force, just kind of to reiterate the mission that has been laid out in the bylaws. The fact that we are a community-led task force addressing public safety and wellness needs in Durham, in our community, and educating these residents on what is available. And the end goal of this is to provide a set of recommendations that we can use to enhance public safety and wellness in our community. So just kind of want to bring those front of mind as we kind of lead through this presentation. Just based off of the initial guidelines and documentations, the function of the Safety and Wellness Task Force as a large entity is to do a review of the existing institutional and community-based public safety and wellness resources to really understand what is at our disposal in Durham, what we need in Durham, and then to identify those needs and provide specific targeted recommendations to address these areas. And we've laid those out in the roundtables that were created already. So those specific target areas will have target recommendations to address those things. We've talked about the 3 listening sessions in the first 90 days, and we've already had them for the larger task force meeting. And then those options are also available at the roundtable level as well. So we'll have a public meeting after the formal process of recommendations are completed. And as it is noted in the agenda for today's meeting, there are public quarterly reports to assess the progress and the work that y'all are doing on the task force. And then, as I said before, you're going to evaluate and make those recommendations, and these are going to come across various community or city and county levels as well. So just to kind of set the stage, those are the functions and the duties of the roundtables. We really want to hammer into the groups for the roundtables and how those listening sessions should be formatted and set up moving forward. So to begin, it's helpful to view these roundtables as an ad hoc committee of the larger body itself. That way we can kind of center the work that we're doing in each individual roundtable as it relates to the whole group. And a big part of this, of the roundtables, is to gather data from subject matter experts from the community. We really want to understand those stories of people going through the criminal legal system. What areas for opportunity are there? What areas do we need to address? And the focus of this should be what is already in place in Durham. What are the practices that are involved in those? And then we need to identify those gaps and suggest those resources as needed. And this is, as stated before, this is all for the roundtable. So one of those ways that comes to fruition is to recommend alternative responses for each individual roundtable target area. And finally, I want to mention that it is important to include non-task force members on these roundtables. So as roundtables, y'all have the ability and the power to increase membership in those roundtables that will come to those meetings regularly, that will contribute, that will also help with the work and the requests and stuff that are needed to come out of them. And one of the things y'all have been working on very diligently are these listening sessions. And we've heard various iterations of how y'all envision these happening. So we just kind of want to center it around the foundation of what they're supposed to be. So the listening sessions, as stated before, could be at the full task force level or the roundtable level. And it is expected to be a space where people most affected by the legal system may voice their concerns and tell their stories, because we need to understand the context behind how these systems affect the entire community. Specifically for people whose voices are not traditionally heard by decision makers. So that's an important area of the listening sessions to be mindful of when creating these opportunities, these public forums that we're going to be engaging the community in. Now, these listening sessions can also be conducted with members of professional organizations, service agencies, such as we just had one with Bull City United, for one of the roundtables. So keep in mind that these are the options that y'all have for you at your disposal when doing these listening sessions. And we've heard a lot of really good ideas come out of that. And now when centering ourselves around the work, we really need to understand the context behind the stories we're listening. So if we don't know how someone moves specifically through, so if we don't have a Durham specific sequential intercept map where we know where the inputs and outputs are, where the areas of opportunity are for us to work on, if we don't have that understanding, then we won't really come to an informed conclusion. So we just need to remember that context is key here, and that we need to assess and evaluate these systems, factors, and components. So I believe here I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne to go into more detail about how we go through this.
And so there are many different approaches that we can use to understand the context that residents face regarding many of the issues that the roundtable groups are looking at. To look at the context of the situation, it is not just what meets the eye immediately, it is also what is beneath the surface. And so the next slide, please, James. And so when we look at the system iceberg here, you'll realize that we have at the top the events, which are things that really happen, that grab our attention. What is it that cause our interest to be piqued at this moment? An example of this, and I'm going to try and use example to go through so you could follow. An example of this event could be a shooting that occurred on X Street. But it is not just a shooting in and of itself. There is something that had caused that shooting. And so what James and I are suggesting to you is we can't just look at the event alone that occurred. We have to ask appropriate questions to see what had initiated or caused the shooting. And that's when we are going to now look at patterns of behavior. And patterns of behavior, as it says, is now looking at what particular trends have been taking place in the same region where the shooting took place. So we're assuming it is Durham for the purpose of our conversation, but then we realize that there is a trend where, or there is an increase in shooting occurring in Durham. And so we recognize that this shooting that we saw on X Street is not an isolated incident that occurred because of just one unique reason. There could be a myriad or a multiplicity of factors that contribute to that shooting. So we look at the pattern after that. Then we try to look for the structure, and what that means then is what has influenced that structure. And when we talk about what has influenced that structure, you know, some of us could say, well, it might be COVID, because there are different crimes that are happening as a result of people being locked in. Other people will look at the data and realize, oh, actually, the shootings are taking place because of the gentrification that is happening in the city, because people have been displaced, and there becomes a domino effect that is happening across the city and affecting community safety. And then we look beyond that, we look at the mental models, which look at the many assumptions and that people hold about the system. One assumption that I have heard consistently across all the roundtables is racism, that racism is the root of many of these different things happening, or is it classism? We've also heard that. We've also heard about greed for wealth, where we have people just wanting more and more money and disregarding the most economically modest people or residents in our community. And you know, when we look at this systems iceberg, it is important that we're going to try and do a factor analysis. And when we talk about factor analysis in this case, we're not talking about the statistical factor analysis. We're instead more concerned about the qualitative factor analysis. Next slide, please, James. And that's where we're going to, that is what SRO is going to allow us to see the real trends that are happening. So as we deal with the different topics that you have, whether it's the SRO or the violence de-escalation or the 911 unarmed responders, sorry. We're going to look at each thing and see, okay, what exactly is happening in Ornishire? Is there a decline when it comes on to violence across Durham, or is there an increase when it concerns violence across Durham? And even before then, we have to hold ourselves accountable to ask, how do we know what we think we know? Because many times we, because of the assumptions that we've made using the systems iceberg, we make assumptions that we know so many things. In one recent roundtable listening session, we had one person who was telling us how impactful a particular program was. But this person was not telling us how this member knows that this program is being effective. But this is where we, as task force members, because we will ultimately be putting forward recommendations to City Council, and we want to make sure that we have solid recommendations. And for this reason, we'll just have to push ourselves to ensure that we show the receipts. In other words, prove that we know what we know, and that our assumptions are not just simply mirage in the middle of the highway, assuming that there's a water right there, and as soon as we get closer, there's no water. Next slide, please, James. Now, when we talk about the factor analysis again, like statistics, we'll be simplifying the data or reducing the noise or extracting variables of interest. But in our factor analysis here for the qualitative purpose, we'll just be asking lots of why questions. It's the baby talk, essentially. We know children ask a lot of why, but why, but why? And that is where we're going to, again, challenge each other in a very respectful way and ask the why questions to solicit the best answers to the many challenges that we experience. At this point, we're going to use an example. Xavier and Marcia had volunteered themselves. And so Xavier and Marcia, do you mind using your example now, please?
Certainly. Xavier, why do you believe Durham is unsafe?
Well, I believe Durham is safer for some than for others.
And why is Durham safer for some more than others?
Well, Durham's reflective of oppression in our society as a whole.
And why is society as a whole seen as oppressive?
Well, oppression was an effective means for suppressing others' rights and opportunities based on race and class.
And why has oppression based on race and class been effective over so long?
Well, because society's gotten away with it over time.
And why do you think we as a society can get away with oppressing people?
Because oppression has been baked into our laws and our policies for a very long time.
Amen. The
Thank you,
five whys.
Thank you, Xavier and Marcia. And so there we saw an example of Marcia pushing Xavier to really highlight what he thinks he knows. And he was pointing out many factors, and he went beyond just what the eyes see and into the systems of oppression that have been embedded in our society for a while. And then in this case, if they wanted to address the challenges of violence in Durham, then it would be pertinent for them to try and develop recommendations for policies that would include addressing this system that has perpetuated or created the violence. Next slide, please, James. So now we're combining the factor analysis as well as our systems iceberg. When we talk about the mental models, we talk about the implicit biases that we have. Again, so many of us have come to the table and we have already our own biases about so many different things. Are these biases coming from real lived experience? Of course. Do we abandon these real lived experience? No. What we do in many of these situations is we try to make our experiences become more than just an anecdotal evidence or an anecdotal experience, to something that there is evidence. We share experiences, we talk with each other. And for that reason, we want for each roundtable, even with divergent viewpoints, that each roundtable allows each member on that roundtable group to contribute meaningfully, even when those ideas may contradict the ideas that we hold dearly based on our own experiences. We also want to talk about the mental modes with regard to SMART goals, because these mental modes, again, are the assumptions that we have. But when we look towards how we fix this problem, next slide, please, James, we're going to be looking at how do we ensure that we create policies or create recommendations, that are understood by everybody, that is easy to follow. When we're ultimately creating the recommendations that will be sent to City Council, we're asking that we use very clear language so that there's no nuance or ambiguity with what we're suggesting. That we call a spade, but that we say exactly what we want. And next slide, please, James. And the next slide, please. And then this is where I want to pay some attention to the SMART goals that we had, that in addition to being mindful of our own assumptions when we approach the different topics for our roundtable, that we develop strategies or we develop recommendations that are also abide by the SMART goals. Many of us are accustomed to the SMART goals or the SMART objectives, but here we have deliberately the SMART goals because we want to move beyond just ensuring that we're being specific, that whatever recommendations we have are measurable, that they're really realistic and are attainable, that they're relevant and just relevant to Durham. We're not talking about what's happening in New York City or Orlando. We're talking about Durham. We're going to talk about it being time bound. And the other two constructs that we have here are inclusive. And when we talk about inclusive, we're talking about, are we allowing everybody to join the table? I remember for one task force group, they were being very strategic and wanting to make sure that they use strategies that will allow everybody, especially those people who are affected by the different topics we're dealing with. And they're being very innovative in ensuring that these vulnerable populations are brought to the table. So I encourage you, please try to be inclusive too, even in your listening sessions. The same is true with regard to ensuring that we have equitable policies or equitable recommendations, because we want to know that what we're doing is addressing the structural racism in society while advancing racial equity, because we know that the history of Durham underscores an urgent need for our goals to move from just SMART to SMARTY and include inclusivity and creating a more equitable society. Next slide, please, James. We can also, another suggestion that we have for you is you can use your own theory of change, which is essentially your logic model. And what this is, it's a really detailed mapping of the strategy that you have and how you intend to move from your goal to what resources you will need. An example of this would be on the next slide, where you start from the outcome. What are the outcomes what outcomes are you expecting? And after the outcomes, you then ask yourself, then what outputs are there? And these are just the indicators, those things that are measurable again, that you will use to make sure that the outcome, the long-term goal, the short-term goal, the medium-term goal that you have are in fact being achieved. But before you get to the output, you have to include activities. And the activities too are different interventions that you will use. We can think, for example, somebody referenced earlier, Budget United. Well, they, I'm sure, have activities that they're using to do the work they're doing to ensure that they reach their outcomes. And before the activities, we have to look at inputs. what inputs are there? The city is providing some inputs here because, and the county and DPS, and those inputs could include the human resource. So I want you to think about those things too. Locations for meetings for different residents or participants. And then we talk about the situation. What exactly is the situation that we're living in Durham that we want to change? And so the situation on the right would ultimately be improved to give you the better outcome or goal that you have on the left. And next slide, please, James. Now, the process essentially is what most of you have been doing. But just as a reminder, we're asking that you collaborate not just with each other, but also with other external stakeholders, whether it is the most vulnerable in our community. Keep it in mind that these people are also experts. It's not only, the experts are not just people who are in the academy. The experts are people who live their experiences, the oppressive experiences too, historically and even in today's society. And so we want to collaborate with them. We want to define exactly what our problem is. So you have your own special interest group. Start with defining a problem. What exactly is the problem there? And I think that will help many of you. Yes, you are in a roundtable called X, but what exactly is the problem there? Try to make that in a statement or two. And then you listen to as many people as possible. What innovative strategies can you think of, or strategies you've been used elsewhere to address this problem? So you're going to look to, you have James and you have me, and we will go and do research for you. If you want to explore, okay, what interventions have been used, for example, in Denver or in Eugene, we can go and do that for you. And does this strategy fit? Because not because a program works well in Boston, it means that the program is going to work well in Durham, because we have to recognize that context does matter. How much it costs is less relevant to our purpose here, but what do residents and other experts think about your strategy? So yes, you have your strategy, but try to also check in with what other people, the residents and other experts think about your strategy. And after you hear from them, refine your strategies and your idea, and come back to the larger task force, and we can put everything together and send to City Council. I think that's it for questions, and we're now at questions. So any comments, questions, or concerns? Okay, I think that's it. So I'll turn over now to you, Marcia.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry, I do have a comment. I apologize for jumping in late. So some of us are familiar with logic models and some of us are not. So Dwayne, would you and James and where is she? Will you be the ones to assist with logic models, or since that's being brought up, what's happening with those?
Yes, whatever support any member of the task force needs or any roundtable needs, we will provide it.
Great. Thank you, Dwayne. That was very helpful. We're got a lot to do, a lot to think about, a lot of information to gather, and a lot of discernment before us. And that was very helpful in helping us have the tools to do that effectively and efficiently. So thanks so much. Now we get to hear our roundtable reports. It's great that we have these, and like to begin.
I'm sorry, Marcia. I'm
Certainly.
so sorry. We
ahead.
did have a hand up, Manju.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it.
We've been having a very good discussion in chat as well.
Oh, okay, please.
Yeah, and that's all I was highlighting, that we're having a discussion in chat and wearing the chat hat. I wanted to name that,
Great.
but we don't have to derail the process. We could circle back to it. We could just document that there's this conversation happening and create a space for it. Or if it feels useful to name what we're talking about, I can.
We can circle back.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Manju. So the first report will be from Andrea Muffin Hudson from the Criminal Legal System Roundtable. You're muted, dear. There you go.
Thank you. Let me pull up my notes. So we have had two roundtable meetings so far, and our first one we were discussing how the recommendations will be used, and if there's a body that reviews complaints against officers, if there's any data for that. We talked about adding new RT members, which we have, and I'm not quite sure of if I'm going to be pronouncing the name correctly, but Leslie Neidig and Marion Bailey are now members of the roundtable. Also, we have started doing a process of beginning to end, like from when someone is first encountered with the police, the process of them being incarcerated with like going to the magistrate, having their first appearance, and where there can be interventions other than, you know, them being incarcerated for an extended period of time. Where can there be an intervention where something else can happen other than incarceration? And yeah, we talked about how the process for someone who has been incarcerated, that the trauma that lives in their bodies on a daily basis, and how, you know, they can navigate life with this trauma every day. So, you know, when I hear people say that, you know, we need to sit down with the police or we need to sit down with the sheriff's department, I don't think that folks realize how traumatizing it is to someone who's been incarcerated by the police or someone who has sat in that jail with those same sheriffs being verbally abused and dehumanized on a daily basis. So, yeah, that's what we're trying to get people to see with our roundtable, is what it's like to be in that situation without having to actually go through that situation themselves, because we know, you know, mistakes happen, but we can learn from other people's mistakes because we don't live long enough to make all those mistakes ourselves. So if we can just be mindful of that, I think we'll be really, really successful. I don't know if I left
Thank
anything out,
you.
but if I have, let me know.
I think it's great. The one thing that struck, you know, as we do that sequence of what happens, you get arrested and then what, is the economic inequality is just stunning. And I just want to thank you, Muffin, for the work that you do on bail. That's just so in our face, and something that I think we can do something about. Well, you're doing something about, and we can do even more. We can follow your lead. Jesse.
Muffin, can you just repeat the two community members that you mentioned that were joining y'all's roundtable committee?
Yes, Leslie Neidig, N-Y-D-I-C-K, and Marion Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y.
Thank you.
Yes. And Leslie is a defense attorney and also doing immigration law. And Marion Bailey is a survivor. Her grandson was shot and killed, and she reaches out and comforts and provides services for families who endure fatal violence.
And if we can also lift up that Mrs. Bailey's grandson, Kenneth, was shot by police.
Her grandson?
Was it Kenneth Bailey's grandson?
No, it's a different person.
Okay.
But there's so much there. And her relationship. Anyway,
Okay.
We're just so
corrected.
No problem. We're just very grateful for both these fine folks.
And Muffin, your suggestion had also been to see if we could get somebody from a magistrate's office, either a current or former magistrate, to help talk with us too, right? Especially about that early intervention.
Yes, because
an
the
alternative.
magistrate has a lot of power on whether or not someone languishes in a cage or if someone gets to go to treatment, and go home. That's like the second place, because the police have the first, but the magistrate is the first, judicial official.
For us to be able to hear from the people who, like you've been through the process, but then also hear from a magistrate about how the process could be made much better and divert as much as possible. And also to deal with the bail issue to the extent that, as you were pointing out, we have some leeway to do that in the bond process.
Yeah. Thanks. Jesse, would you like to give us an update on the SROs, please?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Isaac had his hand up first.
Before it, Isaac.
Sorry, thanks so much.
I've got to find the hand. Sorry about that, Isaac.
Muffin, just a question. I was wondering if your roundtable has thought about how receptive the courts are, basically how to communicate your recommendations to the courts and how receptive they would be, because it feels like any recommendations that you all come up with aren't directly to the city or county or school board, the three groups that have kind of called us into being here. And it feels like all your recommendations are probably going to go to the courts. And I'm just wondering if you all have thought about how to negotiate that part.
I don't think we've gotten that far as negotiating that, but we have spoken about that, it would be the senior chief superior court judge and the senior district court judge that will make the decisions around, the bail schedule and things like that. But we haven't discussed how we will present it to them, or even if we will.
Any other questions for Muffin? If not, I'll keep us moving. Okay. For context, I'm on the SRO Roundtable Committee with Alec, Tyler, and Nori and Tonya, who are, the two of them are not present right now. The five of us are there. We've also met twice. We have our third meeting scheduled, have been meeting essentially every 2 weeks. We spent our first meeting just establishing process agreements. We have 5, which I'll read to you. We will respect our identities and hold space for each other. We will step up and step back accordingly. We will offer comprehensive support, which is both loving encouragement and accountability. We will be okay with difficult conversations, disagreements, and stalemates, and we will function together cooperatively. We also shared why we wanted to be on the SRO Roundtable Committee. Some of the thoughts were just our experiences with law enforcement while in the context of education, concerns about making SROs the primary or only option for safety in schools, the shared belief in the collective power of youth, parents, teachers, and community members, the desire for working cooperatively and collaboratively with all community members, principals, teachers, TAs, custodians, students, parents, and more. Naming service of SROs as well as harm and hurt due to SROs, particularly in the high school setting. Imagination for police-free schools and thinking about the alternatives, what needs to be in place instead of SROs, being pro-liberation, being pro-student, and maintaining an ethic of care and protecting our more vulnerable folks who are historically targeted folks. Because I don't know that folks are inherently vulnerable sometimes, but centering those who are most impacted by SROs and addressing systems level issues through research. We spent our second meeting discussing how we would begin coordinating our listening sessions. a dynamic conversation we had. And we named some of the different populations that we wanted to hear from and some of the different formats for receiving that data, collecting that data, and the considerations we would take for inviting other community members to support our SRO roundtable work. I think our approach, since we have 5 task force members, which is, I think, the largest of the roundtable groups, is really kind of trusting our capacity to kind of divide and divide and conquer, if you will, and that spirit of working cooperatively and collaboratively. Nori and Tyler are taking point on our youth listening session and have already worked to help us identify youth leaders to help with organizing. So hopefully we'll be able to name a couple of youth that will join our roundtable specifically for the listening session for youth. And then Tonya, Alec, and I are taking point on a listening session for principals. Not as dynamic in terms of a process, since there's a smaller number of principals that and their information is a little bit easier to access given the way they function. So that's kind of where we are right now. I think we have some imagination for other listening sessions. I think we've named parents. We've also named SROs. And so there's some active conversation around the purpose of that, particularly SROs. And I think that just sits with our process agreement of being okay with difficult conversations and disagreements and stalemates and continuing to function together cooperatively. So really grateful, and just want to echo while I have the mic, Muffin and Manju's comments in the chat around other task force that exist and other resources that have already been in play, and the importance of creating space for community members to participate in this process from a place of autonomy and agency. So continuing to figure out what those other listening sessions will look like. I'll open space for questions or for Tyler and Alec to chime in if I've missed something.
I think you got it. Focusing on what the questions are going to be, what are the things you want to dig into, and trying to do, focus on like principals during the summer because they don't have school, and then getting ready. Yeah, we were big. I think this was a big thing Alec brought up, was to have youth lead the youth listening session, which I think will take about a month, maybe a month and a half for us to get a good group of youth together, walk through what the purposes are, and help them organize their own listening sessions within their school. So just really excited about that. Appreciate that, Cason.
Yeah. Manju, did you have anything?
Just wanted to lift up Mike's comment from the chat. So beautiful. Mike, do you want to share that aloud?
Oh, you mean about the, not that you don't already have enough to do, but talk about so much overlap between what these roundtables are doing. As we were talking in ours about the criminal legal system, we were noting the lack of support for family members of people who are incarcerated, and the lack of support for people who are victims of crime or their family members of victims of crime, and that how important that is, especially to be there for young people, as in students. And what an opportunity perhaps that the schools could provide that kind of support, you know, as a real way, a real definition of community wellness and safety instead of SROs. But that might be beyond what you guys had already, you've already bitten off a lot. You may not want to take that on as well. But yeah, that engages the issues of mental health, which you've all said, you know, is informing all of our roundtables. So
yeah, I think we recognized that we needed to start with youth, and we expect that starting with them will help inform the listening sessions that come afterwards. And so everything that you're talking about, I think, is a part of what we anticipate will come afterwards. Right. It just feels important to start with youth. And I echo what Tyler mentioned in terms of the way we want to go about doing that.
Well, they're the first ones you'd want to hear from because they're the ones who can tell you what they need because they're the ones who have family members in jail. They're the ones who have family affected by crime.
Yeah.
You could say,
And
this
so-
is the kind of thing, if I had this in the school, this would help me.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that that kind of data is what we'll gather in the listening session for youth, and that will continue to guide us. If there's nothing else, thanks.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, SRO Roundtable. Samuel, would you like to share our violence interrupters de-escalation roundtable?
Yes, of course. And similar to all of the other groups that have already presented and shared out, we have also met 2 times and we plan on meeting a 3rd time. I believe it's July 19th. Is that a Monday? I could be wrong, but I might need to check my calendar on that. Anyway, in our first meeting, we started to kind of establish what I would define as conjunct methods of analysis that we believe will properly and accurately assess the condition of violence and its effects on Durhamites in the current moment. So we can get a pretty good scope of where things are and where things might need adjustments at. And so one of our methods will specifically revolve around contacting other departments and agencies like the Sheriff's Office, the DPD, and even the Department of Public Health to receive access to and examine their contemporary data on things such as the amount of patients that have been admitted to a hospital because of a gunshot wound, for example. And so throughout this process, we also we're seeking to find out where and when acts of violence are taking place, and in particular, who are committing these violent acts and why. And so we hope to build trust with these departments, as we would like to use this information to create a visual representation of violence throughout Durham so that we can directly locate areas where violence is most prevalent. And while on the subject of visual representation, we also established that we might plan to embark on sequentially mapping, out different violence intervention programs, organizations, and services to basically get a sense of what resources our members of the community have at their use and how effective those resources are. And so this directly leads me into our second meeting where we met with some individuals, well, specifically one individual from the organization called Bull City United. And in speaking with them, we were able to gain a brief understanding of what BCU does for the community and how they provide their services to the community, along with the areas within Durham that they serve in. And so we plan on reaching out to them again so that we could see data and gain more insight into how their work specifically has left an impact on Durham. And lastly, we also look forward to convening directly with the community so that we can, center them in our efforts as our efforts are centered around them and designated for them. And so that's basically a general recap of our first 2 meetings. And in our third meeting, we plan on expanding on these kind of concrete, I don't want to say building blocks that we've already established, and start data analysis and start actually trying to figure out ways we can engage with the community and stuff like that. Did I cover everything or did I miss something?
I think it was perfect. Perfect. Wanda, do you have anything to add?
Just a little bit. Thanks, Samuel. You are a shining star. So we learned in terms of Bull City United that there have not been any homicides, gun violence in the areas that they participate in, which basically include adults in public housing areas. So that's the main focus of Bull City United. The other thing is that they work with adults, and the work that Project Build does has more to do with gang and gang violence. So we're going to invite them next time as well. So there are lots of pieces here, and we'll continue to move forward.
Any questions? Yes, Jennifer.
I just wanted to mention super briefly, I doubt this will be an issue because there's already so much talent and so many resources on and connected to this roundtable. But you had talked about looking at ED data, which is like, syndromic data, surveillance data, blah, blah, blah. If ever you need someone who has been neck deep in that stuff before to help offer insight as to like, what am I looking at and why is the data so hinky? And because that stuff is super messy, my time is your time. Let me know.
Oh, great. Great. We'll be in touch. Thank you. That's very generous.
Please make me regret my offer. I would love to hang out.
Okay, great. Anybody, any other hands? I'm trying to learn how to find them. I don't see any.
Today's hand is up.
Oh, golly gee whiz. Thanks.
Thanks, Xavier and Marcia. And thank you, Samuel, and for that presentation. And Wanda, I was wondering if Bull City had mentioned the time frame that they had been in the neighborhoods monitoring, and so what they're counting from, and then what do they consider as adults? Is it literally 18 and up, or is it some other number?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Thanks for the question. If that came up kind of at the end of our conversation. So adult was mentioned. So, you know, I don't want to make assumptions, but the assumption is adult could be 18 to 20 or 21 and up. The time frame, the presenter actually was talking about work that had begun, I want to say in May or before.
It was a 90-day, as I remember, in the
Okay.
last 90 days in the 2 census tracts that they are committed to, that there had been no shootings. No one had been injured or killed, is what I understood.
Right. And specifically, again, they're looking at public housing, specific public housing communities in East Durham and South Side. So Oxford Manor, Hoover Road, and Cornwallis, and McDougal Terrace. So those are the areas specifically that they are working in. So, you know, if we are thinking, or we're thinking that they are working all over Durham in all aspects of Durham, that is not their focus right now. They're focused on communities where the data has shown that the most assistance was needed for their services. And they not only prevent acts of violence, gun violence, they also support the community in other ways, connecting them to mental health resources, providing food and clothes, and connecting to those kinds of resources as well.
Yes, I do want to clarify that those that the 2 places that they were referring to, though, is the McDougal Terrace community and Southside. That the other areas you mentioned, Wanda, that's where they're going to be going to as they expand with this new funding, is what I understand. That there were 2 census tracts, McDougal Terrace and Southside. All right. Any other questions? Xavier, do you see any hands? I don't.
I don't see any hands, but there was a question from Manju in the chat about just how can we possibly get some cross-pollination really around the reports and the good things that are coming in the roundtables, because we've already seen where some information from one roundtable could really inform the work of other roundtables. So I think that's something that Marcia, you and I need to work with Dwayne and James on to make sure that everybody's getting information and lifting each other up. You know,
that's right.
I spent some time at the beginning of this meeting talking about how much we appreciate the support we're getting from the department and the people working with the city. The expertise in this task force is just as awesome. And I've really been enjoying. I'm definitely gonna go back over the recording and look for things that I and you, Marcia, can follow up on with Dwayne and James to make sure that things keep moving. I do want to reiterate that Marcia and I have kind of split to make sure we have the capacity to really be supportive as well. And so the SRO and 911 roundtables are connected to me, and Marcia's connected to the criminal legal system roundtables and the violence interruption. So we are supporting you in the same way that Dwayne and is supporting you, and don't want there to be any confusion. We are task force members along with you, and you can always speak to either of us about those areas as well. So we do need to make sure that we get information out as quickly as possible once the roundtable has submitted its minutes to Dwayne.
Absolutely, I agree, and we will work on that. You know, like a library for us. Absolutely, of shared documents. Tyler, would you like?
Yeah, just one I forgot to mention, if folks know of specific youth that may be interested in hosting a roundtable at their school, we're looking at middle schools and high schools. Pretty sure we're gonna have Jordan and Hillside. Like, I'm pretty sure that's not gonna be difficult. I already know youth to go, but yeah. So just if you know youth who may be gregarious, they got the energy, and you think these might be good folks that could round up youth who are actually impacted by SRO. You don't have to give the name and contact info, well, just the names who provide the name to then send the information out, because you're the one who has the relationship. And the information will be simply, if you're interested, then sign up for a separate meeting. And then in that meeting, we will organize that specific group of you. But so you can just feel free to email me or Nori McDuffie, the name and I guess school and grade of the youth. And we'll be sure to follow up with you kind of the pitch on. We're also gonna work with Xavier and Dr. Campbell on, sooner or later we'll have a stipend. We'll know what the money amount is for the youth that organize these individual listening sessions. Sorry, I forgot to say that part.
That's great. So folks who have contacts with great student leaders, get in touch with Tyler and Nori. That's beautiful. Great. And Manju, would you share with us the 911 Crisis Response Roundtable news?
Absolutely. And so in awe of the report backs from all three other teams. Just really amazing work already, and so good to have the ball finally rolling. I would like to share my screen. I'm going to be quickly reporting back from our team and inviting our team to share anything I missed. This is a report back on behalf of Isak, Jennifer, Shanise, me, Dwayne, and James. We talked at first about what are some of the reasons why we needed this body, or why we need a different kind of crisis response. Why do we need a different kind of response when our neighbor is suffering a mismatch of responder skill set to the request for help? So really trying to understand, by looking at the data of the calls for service, what are the requests for help and what are the appropriate skill sets? Just at a glance, the data says that at least a third could easily be addressed by other kinds of providers, likely 2/3. Likelihood of increased escalation, possibly resulting in harm or even death. And then the pipeline that we see into the jail system and the struggles that follow incarceration. Right now, the Office of Community Safety and Wellness is building a team of skilled, compassionate, unarmed responders and solution builders. And they're seeking our task force's input on what the new role of crisis responder could look like. And as we understand it, the mandate for our roundtable is to try and work with them to really channel community input to make that a glorious solution building thing. And to make that possible, we are listening. So listening is really core to our work. Our roundtable is eager to understand more about how Durham residents view 911 and the existing crisis response resources. We want to talk with residents and crisis responder staff. We want to be precise and purposeful with resident time. We will support participant needs as the budget allows, language access, mental health support, childcare stipends. So these are some of the things we were talking about. We weren't expecting that the Office of Community Safety and Wellness would come in already figuring out how to budget for these things. And it's just so awesome. Really seeing how valuable it is to have staff from the office inside of our task force roundtables, listening and immediately working on making it happen. And then our goals, as we understand them, check us if we're wrong, to study, research, and existing models, especially in the South, to offer recommendations on an ongoing basis to the city, the county, and the school board, to listen to as many stakeholders as possible, especially those who've been directly impacted. How do residents view and experience 911? What types of support are residents seeking for what types of challenges? What skills are needed? Develop and present specific textured, detailed policy and practice recommendations to City Council, County Commissioners, and School Board, and present supporting evidence for our recommendations to the extent we're able. We did talk too about this awesome model that Dr. Jennifer Carroll brought to us, the Policing Alternatives and Diversion Initiative in Atlanta, where this is like just a core description of their model. They respond to community calls for service through the number 311. When a caller refers an individual, someone from the response team does outreach to meet that individual, assess their needs, and provide ongoing support. So it's less of like a one-time encounter that feeds someone into a system and more like building a relationship. There's also a channel of providing an immediate alternative to arrest. So through training law enforcement officers to shunt appropriate calls to 311, the 911 of Atlanta is holding a much lighter burden by rerouting many of those calls. So that's the diversion aspect. And then direct services and care navigation. So really helping folks identify what their needs are and access housing support, direct basic needs assessment, long-term case management, and really building relationships to support participants in achieving goals. And so for us, our next steps are we want to meet with y'all, the Office of Community Safety and Wellness. We want to host a learning session with Policing Alternatives and Diversion Initiative Atlanta. And as we talk about cross-pollination, it might be nice to extend that invitation to all of you on the task force or even to the public and say, come learn with us. And we'd like to plan and publicize our first community listening session. So if I missed anything, fellow roundtable members, please pipe up. Oh, and yes, thank you for naming that, Dr. Carroll. There's Black, Latino, trans, formerly incarcerated leadership that is at the helm of this PAD initiative work, which is probably really critical to how effective they've been. They have been profoundly effective, and actually I'll just go ahead and chat into the chat box the link to the report that we're studying in preparation for getting to listen to them. It's been so effective that it's expanding into new districts and taking on new types of calls for service.
Thank you. That was great. Any questions? Any comments? That is extremely inspiring. Thank you for this good news and for all you're doing. We're rocking and rolling now, folks, and can hardly wait to hear at the next meeting what we've accomplished. So thank you, thank you. If there's no other comment or question.
I just wanted to praise one quick thing about the 911 roundtable. So I'm not familiar of a lot of conversations about police alternative crisis response or 911 response that is really beginning to have the conversation in a way that focuses not just on community need, but the specific skill set that is required to meet that community need. 99% of the time, the conversation is like, should it be psychiatrists or social workers? And the reality is like, maybe both, maybe neither, maybe something totally different that we haven't created yet. And so I just wanted to like celebrate and really just express my deep gratitude for that openness in the roundtable to have that really, to have the harder conversation that I hope will produce something more meaningful for the people of Durham.
Beautiful.
I did remember one other thing we talked about that I forgot to highlight, which was this idea of hosting deliberative dialogues. Does someone who knows more about that want to share about that model?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with it in that I've participated in deliberative dialogues as part of the, this is not the formal name of it, but it was essentially the opioid task force in Alamance County where I was previously employed, not by the county. Anyway, it's late, it's been a week. Essentially it is a type of scripted, structured conversation that allows for people from multiple viewpoints, multiple stakeholders to gather, learn information, identify gaps in their information, and discuss solutions to a particular problem. And it is, in my experience, when it's done well, it is as useful in ensuring that multiple perspectives are heard and that people feel heard, as it is effective in helping to build consensus around particular solutions to community problems. So I've seen it operate well dealing with slightly different social issues, and it was suggested as a possible tool in our tool belt should the need for it ever come up, should we have the inclination that it might be useful as part of this process.
Well, as we imagine a new way of doing things, the way that we converse is also should be part of that. This is a new culture I see being created in this town, and there needs to be new process and new approaches to the way that we do engage with one another. So that's wonderful. I'm very interested in that. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Xavier.
And so I'm reminded again that this task force in itself is a new approach in what we're doing in this community, which leads me to circling back to some areas in the chat that Muffin and Manju had mentioned earlier when we were speaking. You know, we talked about the mission statement. It was reinforced with James that we're looking for alternatives to policing. We also were given in bylaws that had an advisory council for us to listen to. So it's really up to each roundtable to determine how that happens for that particular roundtable, and definitely want to acknowledge what Muffin was saying earlier about the fact that bringing someone from law enforcement is not always the best way to get information from them for that particular roundtable. So definitely want to really center ourselves in the fact that this is about community solutions, and we have a department that's supporting us in that. Also want to recognize Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, who's with us tonight, and Commissioner Burns was with us earlier as well. And I always thank you for being here as our liaisons. The last part that we have here, next last, and as we get close to our closing time, is the we're at, believe it or not, we're at the just about at the 90-day mark, and so we have our, speaking of bylaws, a quarterly report. And so basically the three things that have happened up to this point is that we've had organizations come and present to us, give us reports, and Marcia and I will take the lead in putting that part of the quarterly report together. We have had some discussion about how we organize ourselves, and for whatever's, for posterity's sake, if nothing else, we will make sure we list how that was done, how we put together the structure with roundtables listening sessions. But we also need a one-page submission by July 21st from each roundtable that we can add to the quarterly report. If your next meeting comes somewhat after that, but before the 28th, let us know so we can delay that for your roundtable. But we do want to get, just a sense of where you are that we can add to the report that we send out to the county, to the city, and to the Board of Education. And that report should be finished by July 28th. We will, of course, make sure this on the city website that's dedicated to this task force. And whatever other means that reports like this go out, I would defer to Amber, who's, of course, is our host tonight, always allowing us to come together in this virtual way. And we thank you so much, for Amber, for all you're doing. And I'll get more information from you about what that means as far as getting it delivered. But I mention your name earlier and I missed that, and I do apologize. So every roundtable should have a head convener, a convener in chief, a chair. And for those that don't, love for you to make sure that happens in your next meeting so that we can coordinate those reports with those persons. Okay, so we're asking a delay for the next 911 meeting. 7:25 be fine. Because what you get us, we're just going to put into the report and correlate it, so that'll be fine. Thank you. Any questions about this quarterly, other questions about the report, or anything that I misspoke that needs to be corrected? Because that's very possible. Okay, great. And so, of course, our next task force meeting is on the 11th. And just again, a reminder for getting those one-page summaries in. And so we'll close with Marcia.
Well, we'll close as we always close with the word. If you could share a word that describes what you are taking from this time together. And I am taking gratitude, and I'll pass it to Manju.
Taking strength and passing it to Dr. Wanda.
I'm taking trust and I'm passing it to Alec.
I'm taking eagerness. I will pass it to Samuel.
Taking excitement, and I'll pass it to Dr. Campbell.
I'm taking dignity that we treat each other. And I'll pass it to Miss Muffin.
And I will say exhausted. And I will pass it to Manju.
I'll pass it to Toya.
I'm taking foundation, and I will pass it to Samuel.
To the Dr. Carroll.
For me, I think efficacy, effectively getting stuff done, and I will pass it to Isaac.
I'm taking inspiration, and I'll pass it to Tyler.
I'm taking mutual support, and I'll pass it to Wanda.
I went already, so I pass it to Jesse.
I am taking the value of teamwork to make the dream work. I think everyone went, or maybe, we got to get James in there, and Amber, and May. Okay, so I'm going to pick James.
Hey everybody, sorry, I've had internet issues, but I'm going to take passion because I've been so astounded by the passion that y'all bring to this task force. And I'll pass it to whoever hasn't gone yet.
Mayor Pro Tem, Jillian.
I am taking energy, and I think Amber hasn't gone. Amber?
Hey y'all, I'm taking purpose.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, with that, I'll say good night and thank you all so much. You're onward and upward. Failure is impossible. Peace is with us. Good night.